Now mai haramai. To celebrate the University of Canterbury's 150th anniversary, the Department of History is welcoming back and honouring a diversity of our graduates from across the decades. In these This Is Your Life Homecoming Conversations, I'm going to be asking our guests about their memories of their time as a student, discuss their life since graduating and how history has proved useful, and seek advice for those studying history today and into the future. Our guest tonight is Dr. Marguerite Foxon. Dr. Foxon is a performance improvement specialist with 30 plus years experience in managing small and large scale evaluations for corporate, government and non-profit organisations. After graduating in 1967, we're in the 1960s tonight, Marguerite taught history for 2 years at Hamilton Girls High School before moving to Australia. Employment there included several years as a National Director of Education for Price Waterhouse Coopers, followed by 13 years in the United States with Motorola as the Global Manager for Leadership Development and Evaluation. Dr. Foxon established her own consultancy practice in 2006, returning to Australia in 2013, and she's had clients from all around the world until COVID forced her to retire. She was a director with the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance and Instruction for 9 years and appointed a Fellow for Life in 2006. She has taught evaluation masterclasses in 14 countries in North America, Europe, Australia and Asia. Now, Dr. Foxon completed her BA in History at the University of Canterbury. She was in 1967. She was here 65 to 67. And also has 3 graduate qualifications from Australia and New Zealand. Her PhD, which she did from 91 to 95, is from Florida State University in the US, and it was in performance technology and instructional systems. As well as her consulting, she has been a doctoral supervisor, mentored a number of doctoral students in the US and Australia, and continues to do academic editing. And she's also authored books, co-authored 3 books in her field and numerous other articles. Marguerite, welcome back to History. It's great to have you back with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Katie. Well, to be here.
What are some of your memories of your time as a student here? And you were at the downtown campus, the original campus.
Indeed, I was. I think I'm the oldest person in your homecoming group, so that one of the earliest, and I think am I the only one who actually did their degree in the old building?
Just about. Yeah, we've got one more sort of transition time. Yeah.
And so, you know, I think it's for a history person, it was quite wonderful to be in that building with all the history that went with it, and so I really liked that. I was there 65 to 67, and some of the things I remember, I do remember Dr. Orange, who was the reader in history, and he taught me in my second year early modern history from a Marxist perspective, and I hardly knew what he was talking about initially. That was quite a jolt from any approach to history that I had had. But I think one of the most formative was in my third year, Professor Woodward was the head of department, and we had these like seminars or tutorials once a week. I don't know if it went for a term or if it went all year. I have a feeling it went all year. You met once a week with your professor or lecturer on whatever the subject was. Ours was modern history of Ireland from mid-19th century. And of course, you can't hide when there's no more than 10 or 12 of you. You can't just show up and sort of say nothing. So you really had to do the reading, you had to do the research, you had to think about it, you had to have your argument, you had to know what you were going to say, be prepared to speak. And that was a very valuable piece of training, which of course I didn't realise how much use that was going to be to me at the time, but indeed it was. The other thing, which is a bit amusing, my father, in fact, attended that university in 1923. So that's 100 years back. He started in 1923, did his degree part-time over a 6-year period, majored in history. He was a primary teacher and he didn't need a degree, but obviously decided he wanted to do one. And I remember when I was doing a class, we used to sit in the room, and it was tiered up, and they had those benches like, you know, they used to have in kids' classes at school, wooden bench fixed to the floor right across, a wooden seat fixed to the floor, and you sort of slid in and slid along to your spot. And many bored students over the years had carved in their initials, or carved in hearts, or written their names or whatever. And I remember one time sitting in one of these Marxist theory approach classes, and being a bit bored, and looked down, and I was looking at all this graffiti that was carved in, and lo and behold, I see V.B. Foxon, which was my father. And that he got a bit of a ribbing from me on that, because he was always very opposed to any sort of vandalism. And here he was, as a young guy, he'd carved his name, and obviously bored in a lecture also. So that's my main memories, but it was a great time. And I guess the only other thing I'd say is I did my 3 years of history, and in my third year, I also did New Zealand history. And a couple of years ago, when I, in COVID, started reading early New Zealand colonial history, because I had to do something because we were in lockdown, what a shock I got at what is taught today and what we never heard of. And I'll just mention one, and that's Parihaka, which of course everybody knows today. I mean, you have Parihaka Day. It never heard of it. And I was so shocked. I was ashamed of how the government had behaved. I was embarrassed about it. I was angry about it. And it had quite an impact on me. And I'll talk about that later, probably.
Yes. Yes, the 1881 eviction. Yes, in the Taranaki. Yeah, which, yeah, definitely. Since there's more awareness now, but yes, there wasn't then. So, oh no, so those were the times back at the old campus, and the hustle and bustle of it before we moved out here to Ireland. So in your life since graduating, very interested in how history's been useful to you, because we've had a bit of an introduction to all the many things you've done, and we'll be hearing some more details. But so after you graduated, first of all, you went off to teach high school. I
did. I went up to Hamilton Girls High School, managed to skip out of going to Teachers College, and went up there and taught history and some English and history for a couple of years before I went to Australia. And that was great. I enjoyed that. After that, I went to Australia, and I ended up with Price Waterhouse Coopers, one of the big accounting firms, international accounting firms. And I eventually ended up as the National Director of Professional Education for the company, because they have a huge amount of professional education. And I was responsible for that in Australia, Indonesia, and New Guinea. So I travelled up to New Guinea, travelled up to Indonesia, and was not consciously using history particularly, but that's when I began to get very interested in evaluation. And when I look back now, because of the thinking that I've done around this, this interview, I realised that the skills that I had learned, particularly in that seminar class, tutorial class, I started to use those in dealing with data around evaluation. And so then I was at Coopers for Price Waterhouse Coopers for a number of years, and I, in a fit of madness, I guess, thought, why don't I do a PhD and I'll go to Florida State, which was the premier place in the world to do instructional systems and learning technology. That's where it actually is, performance technology. That's where it really started. And they are celebrating their 50th Jubilee next year, in fact, for that program. And so I went there and I did my doctorate there, and had a career for many years in this area of human performance technology. So, you know, this is one of these things that, you know, your mother or your friends say, tell us again what it is you actually do. But in any organizations, whatever they are, big, small, private, public, whatever, they're trying to meet goals, they're trying to improve performance, they're trying to be strategic, whatever they're trying to do. And sometimes these things work and sometimes they don't. Sometimes we don't know why they don't work. many organisations put huge amount of money into human resources, training and development, and so on. So the role of that human performance technologist is to really look at what is it that you're trying to do, and give some advice about how best to do it. And where I specialised was sort of at the back end, so that when companies had put in interventions, they could be training programs, of course, that's very common, but completely change the way they do performance reviews, performance management, could be the way that they teach business development and promote certain business development practices in an organisation. But then nobody knows how to figure out if this is actually working or not. And so that was the sort of role of people like us. And we would call this, in broad terms, evaluation. And this is where I realise now I really did use my history skills, because evaluation, you generate lots and lots of data. And what evaluators who are not good do is just report it, which is not a lot of use to anybody. You need to figure out what is the story in here. And this is so like history. You read, you research, you might run questionnaires with people if you're looking at modern day things, whatever. But however you collect your data, whether at the archives or just talking to people, you have to make sense of it. You have to tell a story. And there's more than one way of interpreting. And it's the same with data. There's more than one way of interpreting. And you have to be able to back up what you are saying and show why. And the interesting thing with evaluation is, one of the areas that I became very good at was being able to say to a client, this is working, or it's not working, or sort of working, whatever. Here's where it's working. Here's the stuff that's really working. Here's the sort of people who are doing what you want done, or here's the sort of where you're getting the results. And here's why. And over here, here's why you're not getting what you want, and here's why. And because so often evaluators can tell you what's happening, but they can't actually tell you why. You've got to be able to tell a story. And I think history skills give you that. They enable you to look at making sense of what you are learning. So that was a big chunk of my life. Well, for many years of my consulting practice, and then trying to train other people in it in workshops and sort of replicate myself. And then finally, just to sort of close it out, and you may want to come back to this, but I have come back the full circle to studying history as history, because in July 2021, we in Sydney went into a 16-week lockdown in COVID, and I thought, my God, what am I going to do? So I decided to reread New Zealand colonial history. This is where I discovered Parihaka and a whole lot of other things. And the Parihaka experience, this unsettlement that comes over the land, made me wonder where my family, my grandparents, who were early settlers in South Canterbury, where did they get their land from? I knew that they had a farm. Actually turned out they had 3. That was news. And where did this land, which was Ngāi Tahu land, where did it come from? How did they get it? They bought it. But I mean, how did it ever get from Ngāi Tahu to white settlers? And so I've been doing history solidly for the last 2 years, including a visit to Christchurch archives and spending hours in there and visiting places where they were living and pouring through close to 3,000 papers, past references, and reading books and so on. So I'm right back.
Right back. All those skills from all those years ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love what you say about, how in your career, those critical thinking skills that you got from history, the communication skills too, and the collaboration skills, all of that, isn't it? Yeah. It's that careful thought, deliberating, all of those skills. And then, of course, the just that sort of passion and love of finding out about the past and all those stories, and even new stories. It's quite excellent. So you very much could in your work, your performance technology, it's sort of like it's sort of solving it's problem solving, would you say, quite a lot of it? So that in analysis, it's sort of focused on that, yeah, there's a particular sort of goal, and then that very much is quite often about very similar to history.
Yeah, if you're doing I mean, there's three parts, I think, to performance technology. You have a client or an organization that says, we've got a problem, or we've got something we want to achieve, or something we want to do.
Yeah.
They come to you and they want help. And you work, these days, of course, you work on teams, you need all sorts of skills. So there's three parts. One is the front end. Well, what exactly is it you want people to do? Half the time they can't even tell you. Oh, we just need better leaders, right?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, what would they look like? What would they be doing?
Yeah.
Leading. So helping people determine what it is they want, or what outcomes they want, or if it's a new thing they're launching, how they want it to be rolled out. That's the front end. And there's a lot of work to do in analysis on the front end. And I did do a lot of that, and I quite enjoy it. Then there's the middle piece where you design the intervention for them, whether it's a training program, whether it's a new performance management system, whether it's the rollout of a whole marketing approach, whether it's a whole different way to do recruiting and get a much better, much more suitable kind of person for the roles, whatever. Yes. That wasn't so interesting to me. And then there's the back end, which is where I really liked and became really good, is assessing what happened, and did we achieve, and was it as successful as you wanted? And if it was, why? So that you can build on that. And if it wasn't, then why not? And what I learned was, and this is where I think it's so relevant to history, there's really no clear facts. You know, you get a lot of opinions from people, you go and observe things, you count things, you know, measure things, qualitative and quantitative data, but you have to make it tell a story. You can't just report it. So it's like in history, you can't just report what happened. You have to enter into it and make meaning of it. And somebody may say, well, I don't agree with you because of these reasons. I think you overemphasize this or that. Fine, but you have to do that. And I think the history skills that I had, I really use those. I see now, I use those in my evaluation. And when I came 2 years ago and got back into doing history, because that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm writing a book based on all this stuff, I took my evaluation skills. I could see that's what I was doing. I was using my evaluation skills to do my history and to make sense. And I realized, as even in performance technology, you have to be aware of what lens you are looking through. What are the glasses that you've got on? You know, you can be working in an organization, as I often was, where women were few and far between at the upper levels. And I could put on my sort of feminist lens, and I could say, well, I can see why things aren't working, because, you know, you're not making good use of women, etc. But you have to own whatever lens you are looking through, and own that, and be mindful of that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it as long as you own it. So history, you may decide to look at, well, anything in history, you may look at it through the feminist lens. I mean, the feminist scholars have brought huge new insights. But then we have third world historians now who are looking at colonial history, for example, through a third world lens and bringing whole new perspectives. And certainly in New Zealand, you have seen this over the last few decades, and we are seeing it in Australia as we're getting educated, highly educated Indigenous people who are using the Indigenous lens to interpret and analyse and tell the story.
Yes, so yeah, historiography, as we call it, it's always on the march, isn't it? And always up for critique and debate, and it's always good when there is critique and debate, because that shows that things are lively and happening. Yes, absolutely. And if you had some advice for some of the people some of our current students who are thinking of going on in some of the areas perhaps similar that you have, or who's studying history today, have you got any sort of advice of what you think you would give to them?
Sure, I always have advice.
Yeah, there's
no, I would say, actually, this is true for any academic field, but it's certainly true for history. Hone your research skills. Learn how to do research. It is a learned craft, and there will be classes in it. You do it by practicing. You do it by looking at how really good researchers, how do they go about it? If you have the opportunity to work with someone and write an article with them, that is, of course, absolutely a wonderful way to learn. But hone your research skills, because no matter where you end up in the working world, the ability to sift through mountains of data to know, especially in this day and age with social media, to know how to tell good data from bad or not good data, reliable from not reliable, right from wrong, and then make sense of it is a critical skill and will cause people to stand out from the rest. And you may be born with a lot of that skill already, but you will have to hone it. So that certainly is one. Plenty of people can give you the facts, but not so many people can make sense of it and find connections between disparate things. And, every now and again we read a book in history, or I've certainly even read in my own field of human performance technology, where someone blows an established belief right out of the water because they've come at it from a different angle. They've they've taken a different interpretation. They perhaps had a different lens on, and all of a sudden you think, oh my gosh, that is actually a legitimate way of looking at that. And maybe I have to rethink some of what I do. So certainly that would be one thing. I think another, Katie, is to remember there are very few facts. And as you and I were observing the other day, even gender is no longer a fact, quite as it was. There's really very few facts, and it's all interpretation. And so while historians are constantly seeking to unearth new truths and new facts and new angles, but you have to question and be open to new slants and know how to test the data and test the evidence. And don't take it for granted because it's been taught like that way or written about like that for the last 80 years.
Yes, all that critical thinking, critically reading everything, isn't it? That's
I think also I liked what Vincent said last week when asked this same question, and he said, if you're studying the history of a place, go there and immerse yourself in it and in the social history. And this is what has made my study of my grandparents very rich. I'm not interested in, tracing the family back to 1352 or something. I'm looking at just two people who arrived from England in South Canterbury, and I'm looking at the whole social history, everything that was happening at the time. I'm setting it in, I'm learning about what was going on in all sorts of areas and looking at what they were doing, and getting a feel for the place. And then I went there, and I tell you, to stand on the farm, the 70-acre farm they had with sheep, and see the fleece table is still there in the shed.
Yes.
It just blew me away. And to walk across, looking at the Alps, and to walk across to the extent of the farm that they had at the river was surreal.
Yes.
And it brought a lot of things home. It brought home things about distance traveled. When I realized my grandmother got on a bicycle on a shingle road and cycled down into Temuka every Saturday to prepare the church for the service. Didn't hop in a car and drive. And you think about this. So I agree with Vincent. Go, if you're doing that sort of history, go and immerse yourself and be part of it. And as I said before, I think constantly check what cultural lens, what lens you're looking through, and own it. you know, nobody can be completely unbiased. I mean, we try, but it's hard.
Yes, no, there are always those, biases we bring to everything. And it's so amazing, is it, when you've been talking today, how papers pass, how we can do so much research. There's so much available, like the more and more newspapers that go online, the more sources that go online. But when we're reading those now, we're reading them on a screen rather than reading the originals increasingly, isn't it? And often I think it's nice when you actually can go into the archives and actually touch the original documents too, isn't it, as well as going to the places where the history happened, because there's that new separation there.
I mean, I was able to go to the National Library in Canberra and, you know, with my gloves on, etc. They trundle out a painting and a handwritten letter from about 1810 to do with a New Zealand, an Australian child who was captured off a boat in New Zealand and held by Maori for some considerable time and so on. And to go and hold that thing, like it was, I was quite overcome.
Yes, yeah, that whole immediacy, to those whole primary documents,
you know, the painting that have been done, which is just the size of a A4 page. Instead of taking a photo and thanking the people who looked after this child, he had a painting done. And I've seen the painting many times in books, but to hold the painting, was like,
that's all brings it alive. It's all of those layers and texture and in the whole making of history. Yeah, absolutely. So you've sort of come a full circle, really, it seems, thanks to COVID in a way.
Yes, well, thanks to COVID. Yeah, it wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah, and it's really sort of, but in the process, realizing, and it seems the way it's explained, that history's always been with you, and those skills that you gained from your degree, but that it can be useful. And I mean, you work across public, non-profit to private, so those skills transfer.
Yes, they do.
Into a whole series of different organisations that way as well, which I think is particularly interesting, that the skills don't vary that way. They work across.
No,
yeah.
And was able to bring them back the way I'd sort of developed them within my working career over 30 years, bring them back into the study of history. And I truly don't believe I would have got such insights in the last 2 years without that. And it's been a sort of almost like a spiritual homecoming for me.
Yes, and it's you're part of I like the way you called it, the Unsettling family histories. These and there are a lot. You belong to sort of call it a tribe, the whole collection of people who are exploring this at the moment. I think Richard Shaw, who's a professor of politics at Massey, has written, of course, his book about this, researching his family in Taranaki, and I know you've been in touch with him and it all connected in to work there. So it is this whole sort of reckoning with the past, isn't it? That this critical family history that it's uncomfortable, but not but intended as sort of a hopeful, and like we were saying, it's a new area, because often these histories weren't known at all. So that's what you've been
not viewed the way we view them today, because again, if you look at New Zealand, and it's happening slowly in Australia, but we're decades behind in New Zealand, academics and historians and writers and commentators with a different lens, with literally a cultural lens, looking and saying, well, your history books have said this, or your commentaries have been this for all these decades, but actually we look at it like this. And now people are saying, maybe we need to think about that. And I think that's what's the unsettling. In the past, you just said, well, that was then, that was 100 years ago, I'm living now. Well, it's not as easy as that. I am what I am now because of some of those things that happened back then.
Yes, and sort of rethinking and often it's it leads to a better future. Is the idea behind it a lot, isn't it? And so what have you found so far in researching your family history that sort of surprised you the most?
Well, I would say the thing that surprised me was, first of all, they have 3 farms. And that my grandmother, they ended up in Temuka with us, and of course that is right near the Arowhenua Pa, which had agitated over getting Ngāi Tahu land back for 50, 60 years. And she was involved with these women. It's very clear from issues in the papers and so on. And she was a formidable organizer. And they had a church that needed it. Its 1866 church was falling down. They couldn't meet in it. And the bishop had issued a kind of a challenge to the Temuka people. Why don't you try and help them? And I can just see what happened. My grandmother just said, you know what? I could help there. And so 1929 started the Depression. She brings these Maori women from Arowhenua Pa into her home and on her farm in Epworth. And they meet twice a month for the next 3 years, and she works with them. She's the only Pākehā, and she works with them, and they raise the rest of the money. It's taken them 20 years, and they only had half the money. And in the next 3 years with her and driving and helping them, they raised the money to get that church built. And in fact, it was in 1932, it was built, the new church was built and dedicated. And I knew nothing about that. And for me, this is part of her, you know, if you'll allow me to use the word, it's almost an atoning for the fact that they had this land. I mean, they bought it. There was nothing wrong there. They bought the land, but realizing this land really had been taken way back, long way. And these folk had suffered terribly and were suffering then. And in some ways still suffer today. And I went to there and I've become involved with the work going on to actually do some restoration in that 90-year-old church that's going on now. I have become involved in that. So that's part of my dealing with the unsettling of the issue.
Yes, the unsettling, and also the whole complexities and the agency of particular individuals, but yeah, that sort of move beyond, you know, we can generalize, can't we? And then when you actually go and look at the local and family stories, you get very much always complexity and surprises, and that's what makes history so fascinating, isn't it? Important. Yeah, it's amazing. Oh well, gosh, it's really great having you come home after out of the middle of the 60s, and of course your dad before that was the first in university. First in family to university, 1923, 100 years is like massive. And yeah, it's just absolutely fascinating to hear, especially all about all of your skills, all through all of your busy career that you're having. And it's just fantastic, all the history, you know, and sort of tying it all in with that full circle. So it's really wonderful to bring you home tonight, Margaret, and celebrate you and just honour everything you do. And so thank you extremely much, and look forward to all your continuation of your work and hearing about it. And I'm sure you've given lots of us lots of thoughts about what we might do with a history degree as well, like all the many things we can do, in particular in the business sector, and that idea that in a changing world we need the arts and social sciences more than ever in graduates to become our business leaders of tomorrow, just like we've been them of the past. So thank you very much, and huge thank you, and thanks for coming home tonight, and ka kite.
Mā te wā.